Hey, everybody, I'm Rick Wilson. Good evening and welcome to the strategy session as we bring you every Tuesday night here at Resolute Square. Stuart Stevens and our colleague Joe Trippi is off tonight. Stuart and I are going to talk to you tonight about a bunch of stuff that's on our minds, including a very special guest to talk to us about Project 2025 a little later in the show. If Project 2025 hasn't scared the hell out of you yet, I recommend you look into it because it will. What I want to start with, though, is the most hilarious political screw up of the year so far, which was someone said to Donald Trump, "Hey, let's go to the Libertarian Convention. Maybe you can win their nomination." Now, folks, libertarians are like cats. Cats believe they are independent, free-spirited beings, but they live inside a system where they're fed all the time and someone scoops the poop out of their box every couple days. Libertarians don't live in the real world, even more so than Donald Trump doesn't live in the real world. But this weekend, when Trump tried to sell the libertarians on bringing them great victories, the response was utterly brutal. Let's go ahead and roll that piece of tape, Sam.
Roy wrote, Donald J. Trump will address the Libertarian Party at its national convention on Saturday. The Libertarian Party should nominate Trump for President of the United States. Whoa. That's nice. That's nice.
You know, and that, Stuart, that wasn't even the worst of it. But can you imagine the process that had to go on inside an actual campaign for someone to say, hey, speaking at the Libertarian Convention is a great idea, Donald. You should do that.
Yeah, before I die, one of my fondest wishes is to get the list of the places that didn't make the vetting that they were supposed to go. Like, let's go. Let's do like a live broadcast from the pound where they're gassing puppies, and you can express. Well, there really is something. The Christie Nome isn't that bad. It really, we came to the conclusion, I think you actually started this idea, that Ron DeSantis' staff secretly hates him. Because why else would you put your guy in a situation that they kept putting him in, like, in white go-go boots, shrimp boat boots, touring a hurricane. And, you just had to, like, no, I hate this guy. We're going to put him out there and he won't know the difference. I'm beginning to think there's an element inside that. You say, okay, like, how does this logic go? We're going to take time off from your criminal trial where so we're going to go out here to a place that, you're going to be booed.
Where they hate him.
They hate him. They hate him.
Folks, listen, I joke about the libertarians because I love. I have what I call a sort of genial libertarian leave me alone streak in my politics, where I think the power of government should be sort of contained. But what the libertarians knew, even though they're crazy when you get them in a room, is that Donald Trump represents the greatest expansion of state power in the history of the United States, by far, bigger than Woodrow Wilson. Bigger than FDR, the biggest expansion of state power in history, because he wants to round up immigrants to the country and ship them home after putting them in detention camps. It's like the worst poison ever. And Trump ends up, Stuart, getting 6 out of 800 votes cast in the Libertarian Convention. Those have got to be close family members who happen to somehow wander into the room. It was humiliating at every level.
Yeah, and you think about the amount of money that you could have gotten for your vote. If I had known this, I would have registered and gone, and I'm sure I could have gotten at least a couple of $100,000 to vote yes out of Trump headquarters in their panic. People forget there's this long connection between the Koch brothers and the Libertarian Party.
Oh, yes.
And Charles Koch ran as a vice president at one time on the Libertarian Party, which, when I was writing my last book, was calls for me to go back and read their platform. And let me tell you, it is fucking nuts. It's
bonkers.
like, some stuff that like everybody would love, like do away with speed limits. But when it gets beyond that, they want to do away, with everything that basically forms any sort of semblance of community or government. So I don't know. There's always these moments in a campaign where you just think that like, oh, these people just really, really don't understand how their candidate is seen.
Right.
And, like showing up in the South Bronx, which is another bizarre encounter.
Well, I mean, look, if you're going to go to the South Bronx, Stuart, what's the first thing you want to do? Find a couple guys who've been accused of murder to stand on stage with you.
Yeah.
I mean, is that because he wants to make himself look a little better, relatively speaking? It's crazy.
Yeah, that's because we're the law and order party.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Speaking of law and order, the trial is wrapping up today. It looks like the final maneuvers happened this afternoon with the defense, of course, saying that Donald Trump is innocent, Michael Cohen's a liar, Stormy Daniels is a whore, and you can only believe what the great Donald Trump tells you. I'm not sure that convinced the jury, but in some ways, I don't know if it matters either way. If he gets convicted, he gets convicted. He has now spent the last 8 weeks stuck in a courtroom because of his own actions, and if he does get convicted, I don't even know that it matters whether he goes to jail or not. I mean, if I were Mershon, I would give him house arrest, but I would tell him house arrest means you stay inside the facility where you are under house arrest. Whether that's Trump Tower or Bedminster or Mar-a-Lago, you're not golfing, you're not running around the pool, you're staying in the residential area of whatever place your dwelling is. I'm just fascinated to see if he'll do it if he's found guilty.
Yeah, I mean, look, I hope he is found guilty, because if he's not, it's going to be like the classic defense attorney who's defending, a guy who's accused of killing a family of 4 and their dog, and produces a dog as proof that he's innocent. They're going to use this as proof that all these other charges, which I think people would agree, even if you think he should be convicted, is obviously, anybody involved in campaigns knows this is a federal election law violation from the very get-go. Yeah. It's just no question about it. And if there was still a functional Federal Election Commission, they would have prosecuted this. But compared to stealing documents, including nuclear secrets, trying to overthrow the government, those are crimes of greater magnitude. So I just hope he is convicted, because otherwise it's going to be used as a proof point that the rest are bogus charges.
Exactly. Well, folks, moving on with the show tonight. And by the way, next week after we should have a verdict by next week. That's going to be amazing. We'll have a lot of fun with that show. I want to introduce everyone to Andra Watkins, who is one of the experts on Project 2025. I interviewed her on my podcast a few weeks ago, and was fascinated and horrified in equal measure. I want to show a quick ad LP has got out about Project 2025, but I will be honest with you about this ad. We're just skimming the surface. We're just touching the most superficial layer of 2025. Let's go ahead and roll that ad, then we'll start the conversation with Andra.
They say Project 2025 will change your life. For once, they're telling the truth.
Donald Trump gets in for 4 more years. He's going full throttle.
Project 2025 is Trump's plan to make America different, less free, less fair, less American. It's a roadmap for total control. Trump's control.
The gloves are off. There are no holds barred here.
Not just of the government, of your life, of your body, of every one of your freedoms, of what you can read and say, and where you can travel. He'll round up American citizens, use the government to punish his enemies, put the crazy and corrupt in power forever.
It's 4 years of scorched earth when Donald Trump retakes the White House.
But he promises to only be a dictator for one day. One day, sure.
And with that, Andra Watkins, publisher of Project 2025 will ruin your life. Andra, tell us a bit about how you came to start analyzing and thinking about 2025, and give us your take on the extremity and the scope and the danger of this project.
I started hearing about Project 2025 last year and picked it up finally in September and started reading it. I didn't really think I'd get through it at the time, so I didn't print it. I was skimming it online. And in the first few pages, I saw hidden Bible verses in it because I grew up in Christian nationalism. I was indoctrinated in that world. I went to a church and school that was part of Jerry Falwell's Senior's Moral Majority in the 70s and 80s in South Carolina. So I was well versed in the language that they had embedded in this document that nobody was talking about. And I persevered and read so much of the document that's not designed to be read by anyone, that's designed to discourage reading.
Right.
They've kind of buried some of the more incendiary things in the middle of it, and you have to persevere. But I did. I read the whole thing, and I had highlighted and marked up hundreds of references to Christian nationalist language or Bible verses or Christian thought, and decided I will write a Substack about this because the mainstream media is virtually not talking about it at all. And I'll cover it as something that this is how I grew up. This is what this means. And this is what it means for you, which nobody was doing at the time.
Right. Well, and go ahead, Stuart.
No, let's ask you a fundamental question. Why did they do this? Why? What is the purpose that you see of putting this out like this? Because as you say, it's not a document that, most of the time in campaigns you try to sort of make things easier for people to read, and like you put it on like something you hang on a door, not like a whole thing. Why? What is the purpose of it, do you think?
Well, I don't know how many people know the history of this document. They started publishing it. The Heritage Foundation started publishing it in 1979. So Ronald Reagan's administration was the first administration to implement about half of that year's version of Project 2025. Every 4 years since, they've published a version of this document. And as they get right-wing things and their agenda implemented, they would move the next version further to the right, closer to what they wanted America to be. I think Project 2025 is their Hail Mary. I think this is everything we want, and we see it as our window to make it happen. So I don't think they're really afraid of what people will think of it. I think they're proud of what they're putting out there, and they want people to know it, and they're certainly already implementing it in many red states today.
Andra, I think it's interesting you point out that Mandate for Leadership started back in 79, and as a guy who was in the conservative movement for a long time, I can tell you those things were so radically different than Project 2025. I mean, they were things like, we should try to find regulations that don't work for the 20th century. We should try to, improve government ethics. So, and it was fairly anodyne and fairly boring. But I mean, Project 2025 now has become this sort of this totemic nature of Project 25 on the right, where they really feel like this is their final battle. They're going to get into office, burn everything down, and some of the folks that are doing the paperwork part of it, like the Heritage guys, they're also taking a lot of inspiration from folks on the outside, like Steve Bannon and Stephen Miller. So, where do you see Trump getting the people to implement this plan if he wins office again?
I don't think he's especially important to this. This isn't written for him specifically. It's written for the next conservative president. So while many people from his prior administration participated, including Stephen Miller, participated in writing and contributing to Project 2025, the people behind this document will be a lot of the people who will recruit others to implement. this
Right.
project.
Right. So as you were watching the way that this is presented to the public, it strikes me that at first they sort of tried to laugh it off. It's like, oh, you're exaggerating. It's not Christian nationalism. But really, when you dig into it, it really becomes, they find a way to inject Christian nationalism in every single aspect of it, including foreign policy, including trade. I mean, it struck me that the dog whistle is more like an air raid siren with a lot of these people.
Yeah, that's true.
And when you for those who haven't spent as much time as you have, which is most people, because you spend more time, I think, than anybody, if what are the things that disturb you the most? Do you think would impact people's lives the most directly if they were able to implement it?
Growing up in that world, I can say that I was not able to do anything. As a kid, I could not go to the movies because all movies were from the pit of Hollywood hell and they were terrible. I could not listen to music of any kind, but Christian music, because it was all secular and worldly and full of sex and awful things. I had very limited ability to read as a child. I could not swim with boys or wear swimsuits around boys. Our clothing was always monitored because starting when we were about 12, we as girls were taught that we always had to control ourselves because the boys could not control themselves. So if the boys lost control, it was our fault. So we had to go through all the things we wore, how we dressed, how we walked, how we talked, our jewelry, everything, and have it conform to the male standard of the church and school that I attended. Of course, abortion was murder. I saw propaganda videos when I was in elementary school that featured things that a child shouldn't have been seeing. And we were given extra credit at school for going to protest in our community as children. So every aspect of my life was controlled by that world. And that is what they will institute in government, should they win.
So I think that one of the things that people are still trying to process about this is the depth of the project. Talk to us a little bit about how wide the portfolio of ideas and issues and programs that they're proposing in this really are, because they span, every aspect of American life, from what I can see.
Really, all you have to do for the culture war side of it is look at red states and what red states are proposing as laws and implementing as laws today. So a national abortion ban and fetal personhood are a given. They're going to do that. They're going to outlaw IVF. They're going to make that impossible to do. They are going to do everything they can to force public schools to teach Christian nationalist indoctrination, history, and other religious tenets in public schools with taxpayer money. They are determined to put God back into public schools. It's something that they were talking about when I was a child, and they're still determined to do it. They are obviously determined to expel illegal immigrants, and they talk about that at great length, but I don't think they would be opposed to expelling people who protest against the government, or even if they're citizens. So, they don't say that in Project 2025, but 45 is saying things like that as recently as this week. So it's not beyond the pale. In terms of foreign policy, you're dealing with people who believe we're living in the last days of the earth because they have this apocalyptic vision of what happens from the Bible. And so Israel plays a role in that. And they believe that it has to be a nation for all of these things to come true in the Bible. So they're making foreign policy decisions and supporting one side or the other based on the Bible and what they believe about it. And is that really the kind of people that we want running our country? You can also look at the culture war things that Ron DeSantis is doing with transgender, LGBTQ, and other red states. I believe they'll weaponize something like the FDA and dramatically curtail people's access to all kinds of drugs that provide life-saving benefits to people in our country. They'll certainly do what Louisiana has done and try to limit access to abortion medication nationwide. But they've also targeted the National Institutes of Health and the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention to gut medical research because they oppose any fetal tissue being used in research. So it's really staggering when you start drilling down to what this could mean. There are people in that camp now saying that women should be unable to vote. And, these are the kinds of things that I never thought I'd hear 4 years ago. So even though that's not in Project 2025, they're a lot bolder about saying what they want to accomplish.
Stuart?
I was going to say, people don't realize that once a major party nominee becomes a nominee, there is a large hunk of federal dollars that comes your way that are for transition planning for both parties. And in presidential campaigns, there'll be a campaign, and then there'll be these other people over here who are actually planning what to do. I think it's private and public funds, Rick. Is that right?
Yes.
I think it takes both.
Yes.
It's sort of a precursor to the way they set up an Argo committees, although I guess in Argo committees don't get much federal funds. So there'll be an office where these people are, once Trump gets the nomination, that our tax dollars will be spent helping to plan it. And I hope that gets a lot of attention, because that will be a real tell as to who they think is going to head this department or that department.
Right.
Yeah, and I mean, they have plans to have him sign over 100 executive orders on day one, immediately after the inauguration. They're already vetting people to bring in. The people who say this can't happen because guardrails haven't read Project 2025. The goal of a lot of those initial executive orders will be to demolish all those guardrails.
Right.
I'm writing this week about their attacks on the free press, and how they plan to restructure the White House Office of Correspondence and Communications to be sort of like the propaganda wing of this administration, and how they will exclude journalists who refuse to accurately and effectively report the party line. So, and that's just the tip of the iceberg with what they're planning to do with that. They're also proposing things like religious indoctrination for welfare assistance. So people who need welfare assistance would have to submit to that in order to qualify for help and money and food and shelter, and even sending people to jail or in lieu of jail, having people do these kinds of religious indoctrination programs to avoid jail time. So there are just so many ways that this could impact people. And a lot of Americans only really think about that when it impacts them or somebody they care about.
Yeah.
So many, I think, still sit and say, well, this could never happen to me. I don't see any of this happening. This happens to somebody, maybe somewhere, but I don't see it happening to me. And so it's really important to pay attention to what red states are doing, because red states, many of them are already well on their way to being the Christo-fascist regimes that Project 2025 calls for.
Well, I can tell you, between Florida and Texas, two states I know pretty well, the supermajorities in the legislatures there and the very ambitious governors of those two states are engaged in a race to the bottom in terms of human liberty and individual liberty in both states. And they are dismantling not only a lot of the protections of individual liberty, but they're also dismantling the things like democratic elections with a small d. It's really quite a remarkable risk factor. Well, Andra Watkins, I want to thank you so much for coming on the show tonight. We really appreciate your time and your insights. And folks, and tell people where they can find you on Substack and on social media.
You can find me on Substack at How Project 2025 Will Ruin Your Life. The web link is Project 2025 is theocracy.substack.com, or you can find me on Instagram and LinkedIn at Andra Watkins, my name.
Lovely. Well, thank you so much again for coming on the show tonight. I want to thank everybody else for watching this evening. We will be back again next Tuesday. You should go ahead and listen to the Joe Trippi podcast. You should listen to my podcast, The Enemies List. Stuart is the last man in America without a podcast, of course, but you can catch him on MSNBC almost any given night of the week. There is my Substack, The Rick Wilson, and you can catch some great Resolute Square swag online at the website, resolutesquare.com. And we look forward to seeing you guys again next Tuesday. Thanks, everybody, for tuning in. Talk to you again.
Andrew, thank you so much for coming.
Thank you, Andrew.
Thanks for having me.